Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of the Leaders in Value Chain podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamariu, and it is my great pleasure and privilege to have with us today Meri Stevens, who is the Chief Operations Officer of Kenvue. Meri has been actually with the J&J group for quite a few years in different positions. In her last position, she was leading all the consumer health, and as many of you know, Kenvue was spin-off from J&J and now is the largest consumer health company in the world. Meri is very eclectic, has a very eclectic career across supply chain and operations, has worked across industries and a very fascinating trajectory, which I will ask her some questions about. She's also worked in her past for Tyco, for Bertelsmann, Knoll, as well as General Electric and Newell Rubbermaid. So Meri, thanks for joining us and pleasure to have you.
Radu, thanks for having me. I'm excited about our conversation.
So let's start with yourself a little bit, and I'm going to ask the question that I like to ask pretty much every guest, because behind a very successful career, behind a professional that makes it to the C level, there's usually a few moments, a few inflection points that really made a lot of difference in their trajectory. So I want to ask you, Meri, what were those points? What were those moments in time in your career that you can look back and say, hey, that made a lot of difference for me?
Yeah, so thanks so much. So, I look back and, as I think about it, there's a couple points for me that were just true points where you really know who you are and whether or not you can pull things through. The first thing is when I had my first plant manager job, and, I was running a plant at GE, and in a very troubling time. We were doing a second source. It was a contract for the Navy for building phalanx gun systems. And so we were picking up things from a different company. We were building the second source for the Navy. And, the plant was new, people were new, and, obviously things are not going exactly the way you have in mind. And so working with the general manager of this particular branch of GE, and he looks at me and he says, Meri, we need to be able to produce. And that's the moment where you say, okay, this is me. There's many other people I can point the finger at. There's many other people that I can say, you are at fault for this problem. The company we're inheriting specifications for are different. But at the end of the day, it's really only about meeting the objective. And this is where you learn two things. One is, how can you make sure that you're taking the accountability and the ownership for this group of people which you're working through, instead of saying, oh, okay, well, but this was wrong and that was wrong and the other thing, and just kind of standing up and saying, okay, we're going to do this together. And so it's a leadership inflection moment. But the second thing that you learn about yourself is that you can do it. And so as things slowly pivot around, performance improves and you start to pull these things together. And so I would say that's one moment. Second moment for me was I had a point in time where I had a serious illness. And, being a woman in a leadership position in operation for a long period of time, I was very much on the nothing's going to stop me. I had 3 children. I never took any time off. Some people take weeks and weeks for maternity leave. I took 2, but was on the phone like the next day, different things. And I had always been this, you can depend on me no matter what. And I had this serious illness that I didn't want to tell anyone about. And so it wasn't until I confided in a couple of people and admitted with vulnerability that I needed help that I actually learned the power that you could have by being able to be vulnerable in a situation. And what I found is that it had no negative impact on my leadership capability. It had no negative impact on my career. It just got me through a period of time with support. And anyone I asked was glad to help. And so I think these moments where you feel like you're in a situation where you can't handle it, you're overwhelmed and other things, the sign of great leaders is having the humility to be able to ask for help at those points in time. Because what I found is that I had this enormous support system that I had in the past been unwilling to leverage. And the last piece that to me truly inflected was I had left Newell Rubbermaid and I was goofing around trying to decide what I wanted to do. And the reason why I had left was because of a personal issue where one of my kids had wobbled. And I was like, okay, what next? And so Kathy Wengel and I had this conversation, which was like, do you want to come to J&J? And she and I had known each other from an outside organization, and, learning that what was important to me was the work and not necessarily the title is what opened up the possibilities for me to be able to step into J&J working for Kathy in a job that was more strategy, where I was used to like running factories and all these other things, but also enabled me to have this amazing opportunity to learn all of the cool things that were going on around us, and then also deploy them to company as large as J&J, which has been an enormously successful journey, but within operations, took us from being somewhat the bottom of the Gartner pyramid to the top in being able to deploy incredibly cool things by learning from the outside environment and bringing them in, as opposed to being consumed day to day with the drumbeat of execution. And so the power of combining strategy with execution has made me a better leader. So as we now step into the separation for Kenvue, all of these things that I've accumulated, as you said, I've been in a lot of industries, I've been in a lot of jobs, I've worked in, many, many different parts of operations over the years, and I've been in product development. And, you kind of said, it takes all of these pieces together and it combines them into a way to lead, which allows me to both zoom in and zoom out. So like in a crisis, I can go down to the lowest level of detail. I can get into a manufacturing plant. I can understand kind of what's going on, but then I can also zoom out and see the broader picture and understand kind of what's the strategic intent? Where are we going? What's the vision of where we want to be? And be able to constantly be floating back and forth so that we're pulling our amazing organization forward while also dealing with the things that people are dealing with today. And so I would say those things together create that inflection moment for me.
Love it. And if I can just summarize the two and a little bit double click on them, the vulnerability piece, right? So the kind of that moment where you can say, look, I'm actually not perfect. I can't handle it all. And look, this is a reality. And then realizing that people actually chip in to help and you don't need to do it all. I think that's something that most of us struggle with at certain points, and then it's almost like a liberation type of a moment. So love your sharing. And indeed, the second piece, maybe I want to emphasize on the beginning where you shared that you joined J&J and you joined Kathy's team, given the fact that you're more interested about the impact and the work rather than, oh, is it the fanciest title and the biggest teams and the biggest revenue? It wasn't about that. It was, how can I help to make a difference? And again, I think I'm emphasizing these points because there's a lot of young listeners, and when we're younger, we tend to, always want bigger and better. And but it's that is not necessarily impact. It's to measure, let's say, from an ego perspective, from a size of an office or from a size of a title, but actually impact can be defined in many other ways. And I remember we had the Lynn Torrell. I don't know, maybe Lynn. She was
Oh, yes.
yeah,
As I said, the
yeah.
world of women in supply chain is very small.
And I remember vividly when she said, at that point, now she's changed jobs, but anyways, at that point she was with the Flextronics,
With
and
Flex,
and
yep.
then yeah, and then she was telling me how when she moved to Flex, it was like, okay, the role wasn't necessarily the biggest or so on, but the impact, the potential to make an impact was there, and then because she took it, then she all made that impact, and then she was given a higher opportunity. So I love to hear that again, and I'm enforcing it for all the people listening. Now, Meri, I also want to ask you, how did you, or is there any secret or not so secret principles of being successful across the wide variety of industries that you've been, GE and then media and then furniture and then, Tyco was in medical devices and then maybe the last ones were more consumer health and now consumer health and then Newell was kind of also consumer health. Any principles of success across industries?
Yeah, so great question. And so the first thing I think everyone needs to think about is, what is your superpower, right? And so is your superpower, a specific industry, or is your superpower driving transformation with technical depth in things like operations? And for me, my superpower is very clear. I love complex, messy situations, because I can tend to look at the situation and understand the levers that need to be pulled. Because as you said, I've worked in a lot of industries, I've worked in a lot of parts of operations, and given the complexity of situations, I can understand what levers need to be pulled. And then the ability to get people to focus on only those things that are important to work on and prioritize and get people around the world to march in the same direction. And then that drives transformative behavior. And so when I take that superpower and I apply it to different industries, a path emerges for me of a pretty simple transformation approach. The first thing is understanding and digesting the outcomes we want to drive. Where do we want to be? Where do we see ourselves? What's important to us? Then it's really much more about, okay, what's in the way? What are the clear priorities we need to focus on in order to be able to get them? How are we measuring that success? And then the agility to understand if things are working or not working so you can adjust, right? So when you look at that kind of a framework, it's hard to say, well, that's not going to apply to any particular industry. So, whether or not you're working in, making one satellite every other month, or you're making millions of bottles of products coming off the line in a consumer business, the strategy is the same. What is the problem to be solved? What are we going to do about it? And then how do we get everybody marching in the same direction so that you have that alignment so that people aren't like skittering all over the place in order to be able to accomplish it? And so, those are the principles that I focus on in order to be able to apply my superpowers towards that transformative behavior. And that's what's given me the success across many, many industries in multiple companies, because if the formula works.
So let me play a little bit devil's advocate here. So our day job, as you may know, is executive search. And I very much resonate, by the way, and agree with your mindset. I've done a lot of different jobs. And about 10 years ago, I stumbled across headhunting and supply chain. I had no clue. And somehow it stuck with me because I love the people and I
Supply chain is addictive, though. It's kind of hard. You have to be a little bit of a masochist, but I think
yeah.
that, because we
But
play
okay,
not to lose, not to win, but
yeah,
but it is
you gotta
addictive,
love
right?
pain, especially
Yeah.
in recent years that has accelerated. But my point to you is what I notice as a behavior. Usually companies need to have a burning platform for them to consider, and I'm overgeneralizing, but for
Mhm.
them to consider, okay, now we should take somebody from outside of the industry. And let me give you an example. Right now in medical devices, for example, maybe, not necessarily J&J, but there's some other companies they say, oh, now we really need to take FMCG people in, or automotive people.
Mhm.
We really need to transform because our margins are completely, I mean, not completely, but badly eroded. So we need to do something about it. Up till 10, 15 years ago, no way. I mean, it's most of the, I mean, again, I'm overgeneralizing, but most of the companies were, medical devices. You just continue your career and you kind of just stuck within the same parameters. That happens not just medical devices, automotive, you name it. Most industries, if you look at 80, 90% of the leaders, I don't have scientific data, but I'm just guessing, would pick more of the same. So I guess my question, $1 million question, because you're living proof that doesn't have to be like that, and actually principles are principles. Are there certain things, because I'm also sure when you went into these organizations, you had to, all the time when you transform, you have to change behavior, you have to change mindsets, you have to change culture. Are there certain things that are low-hanging fruits when you want to change and shift? Hey, this is possible, guys and girls, right? This is, let's expand. Are there certain things that you leverage on to push that through?
So, I think the first thing is not everyone can change industries. So, so I think there's a couple of things you need to be able to do to be able to be successful changing industries. And the first thing is you have to be very technical. So if you can't digest and understand the industry itself and understand enough about the products that you're making, the work that you're doing at a deep technical level, then you can't have good conversations. So one of the things that I told people on coming into Johnson & Johnson and now into Kenvue is that we tend to have a highly technical community. And if you can't have a conversation with that highly technical community about their technical space, it's very hard to gain credibility. So I think that's thing number one, is this ability to digest the industry, understand its fundamentals. And I know I did, as part of J&J, I did a lot of work in the medical device business, and I had to learn a lot about the medical device business in order to be able to even have a conversation with people in the medical device team. Because otherwise I was just someone, and it was like, wah, 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 wah. You couldn't hear anything I was saying until I can convert my language, the observations I had, and the deep technical understanding of the problems that they were facing, the things that were really in their way in order to be able to drive their growth, their understanding. So you have to be able to have a deep technical understanding. The second thing is you need to be able to influence. And so, I say to people these days in operations, not only do you need to be able to run lines productivity and unlock value and efficiency and productivity and all these other things, but you also have to be half marketing, because you need to be able to tell those stories, understand those conflicts, work across many environments, dispel the myths of what is true and what is not true. And, my favorite one is that the supply chain is not a cash register and nothing is discretionary. So we have to think about what it is that we're doing in order to be able to unlock value, as opposed to just, holding up guns and saying, give me money, because that doesn't actually work, right? If you just cut costs, all it does is come back more expensive, right? So, look at some of the people who are failing on some of the great quality issues they have. These are people who went in and systematically cut costs without understanding the ramifications, right? So it's in operations, we can't do that. So really being able to tell those stories, to really be able to understand and demonstrate how value is created with influence, is a big opportunity. And the last one is deeply understanding the science of supply chain and the science of operations at a core level. Because in order to be able to go across businesses, you can't just, assume that something that was going to work building, one every other month, highly complex piece of equipment is going to be the same as running highly automated production lines. And so you have to be able to transcend some of that in order to be able to understand the principles behind it, which then somewhat goes back to number one, which is you have to be highly technical. And so, I think you have to take those three elements and be able to put them together in order to be able to move from industry to industry, because otherwise it's really hard to influence. And at the end of the day, senior leaders' major job is to set vision and then influence and get alignment against that vision in order to be able to go forward.
Love it. So it's, if I can summarize the three, have the technical know-how, right? So speak the language and know how to go 2 centimeters close to the or deep, even meters deep in the ground.
Meters, not centimeters. Centimeters
Meters,
doesn't get it done.
probably meters. You're right. Probably kilometers. Understand the principles. I'm going to point number three. Understand the principles of supply chain and operations, and then fundamentally that layer of influence, soft skills. How do you pull people together? How do you tell the story that kind of gets people rallied out? So this kind of triangle of skill sets. Now I want to transition to Kenvue, because that's one huge story and case study. I mean, the biggest consumer health company in the world. You had to create, really, I mean, a new organization and a new structure for the operations and supply chain teams, as well as for the whole company, really. Tell us a little bit about that, some key lessons learned and key successes.
Yeah, so first of all, I always have to say to people, you're going to say to me, you've never heard of Kenvue, and I'm going to say, we're in your medicine cabinet. We're on your shelf. Kenvue is everywhere, right? Because if you don't have a bottle of Tylenol in your house, I'm going to be surprised. And if it's not a Tylenol, then it's going to be a Listerine, or it's going to be, you use Johnson's baby products at some point in time. And so everyone knows Kenvue. And that's why when I say we are the world's biggest pure play consumer health company in the world, and everybody goes, huh? And I say, no, you do know who I am. And so, I think it's really making sure that you know who we are. And last year on May the 4th, we IPO'd Kenvue to the world as part of the separation from Johnson & Johnson. And it is actually just a hugely exciting point in time for us. And, for many people, they would say, oh my goodness, separations are hard. They require a lot of work. You were part of Johnson & Johnson for 135 years. How could it be that, you had to pull apart entangled systems, entangled processes, and many people would have looked at this as a daunting task. But for me, actually, it's a tremendous opportunity and actually has accelerated our transformation as we think about it from an operations perspective, is how could we take this opportunity to optimize as we went and set up fit for purpose capability? Because that transformation, it's not really just a buzzword for me. It's about constantly disrupting yourself so that you're constantly moving the needle towards the goodness. And so it's taking this opportunity of the separation to deeply embrace digital technologies. We could really redo outdated processes, really reinvent our procurement organization for the purpose of serving the consumer goods industry, and really to think about this in a completely different way so that in addition to the separation, coming out of the time of the pandemic, where I think we all learned a lot of truths that we didn't think of before, you could take this complexity of the separation, the complexity of reimagining supply chains because of what we learned about the volatility, which hasn't really subsided, and how we need to think about it to be even better than before. And so the word that Gartner uses for that right now is this anti-fragile. And so it's like, how do I set this up for the future in a way where it's not just about surviving, but it's about thriving and really taking these elements to both diversify our supply chain, really lean into much more dual sourcing, failover capability, investing for the future. And so we've taken all of these elements and coming out of the separation, in addition to the mountain of work of pulling ourselves away from the company, we're emerging much, much stronger as an operations team. And we just released earnings. Our operations team had a really good year in 23 and really showcased how we could leverage all of those elements to unlock value and be the foundation for solid growth.
I want to double click a little bit on and the point that you made earlier, we're picking the lowest hanging fruits and kind of looking at what is the most important versus what is noise. And you've already mentioned quite a few things, but are there in this process of in some ways, in one way is separation, another way is reinvention, modernization, fit for purpose, right? Were there some things that you were the most important, right? That if you were to give an advice to somebody doing a similar type of, it's very hard actually, similar type, because this is a massive scale and you talk about 15 billion company, but what would be those 2, 3 really, okay, these points, ABC, if I can challenge you, that you really, really need to get right?
I think the first thing is it all starts with people. Always number one is, do you have the best team on the field? Because this work is hard. And so what do the best people look like? In my view, they represent kind of what we talked about before. They're deeply technical. They know their stuff. They are subject matter experts. They're bringing the talents that you need and the focus that you need in order to be able to do it, and organizing them in such a way so that they can thrive in the environment. So number one is, do you have the best team on the field? I think that's always first. Number two is, what are the key levers that are going to give you the space and the air cover in order to be able to leverage that space to reinvest, but also unlock value for investment into the business as a whole, right? I mean, so businesses thrive on investment in innovation, in new product development, in being able to support with, great marketing campaigns and all this other stuff. And so from an operations perspective, we have the most money. We spend the most, we have the most, we need to be able to constantly unlock the value, but we have to do that by both reinvesting and doing things. And so for me, there's been a couple of levers that really make the difference. The first one is, as I said, the first one is digital. Are we using digital? Are we embracing digital? Are we making use of those capabilities coming through the intelligent automation, the investment in capability to be able to, put processes in place that are continuous, that constantly can go faster, but also give us the insights into the totality of what we're trying to do. The second one, and for us, our biggest spend is in procurement. And so I think for most companies, the biggest spend is in procurement. So as an example, coming out of J&J, where procurement worked for the big, $100 billion company, are we set for purpose in a company that's now going to be, 15, $16 billion? And are we set with the speed, agility, category focused, strategic investment in our partnerships that we need to be in order to be, the best Kenvue that we can be? And so we've done a lot of work over the last 2 years in our procurement organization to set up a new procurement organization that is fit for purpose. And that is just one example, but just kind of like a fit for purpose organization that can deeply manage the categories that have the biggest impact. And that has a double benefit. It provides value. As you know, we were in a very inflationary period. The inflation is moderating a bit, not completely. And so, we need to constantly manage that changing cost environment, but also in order to be able to make sure that we have the appropriate resilience in our supply chain, the appropriate traceability in our supply chain, to make sure that as we understand the partners we work with, as we think about how we manage that supply and how we manage demand on the indirect side, we're constantly evolving how we're managing that biggest part of our spend as we go forward. And the last piece to me, and I think this is, really the core of a lot of what we're doing, is this end-to-end, thing, which is not just talk, right? Am I partnering closely with our partners with R&D? Am I partnering closely with our commercial team? Am I partnering with other elements of the organization so that when we think about this seamless portfolio that we have, what we're bringing to market, how we're bringing to market, how we're working with customers, then we're all working in the same direction. And so if I had to pick those three, as the top things that I would say really make the difference, right? And of course you always have to do a good job every day, but you think about it, fundamentals, you can't live without like quality and integrity and compliance. But if you were really looking for those things that move the needle, team, really thinking about digital and embracing it, and then picking the area that provides you the most impact so that you can have the investment capability, are the three things that have helped us as we've gone through this tremendous separation.
Now, I want to ask you on the challenges side, right? So there's plenty. As we discussed, the supply chain has become more.
It's like, what time is it? My phone, it's Friday. It's bound to have, more things come through.
Exactly. We
Because
can't
people
have a
wait
quiet.
until they can't fix it, and then Friday afternoon the phone rings and like, oh, by the
Exactly.
way.
Yeah. You can't have a quiet weekend. So that's a given. But there's many tough problems to fix. And I'm curious from your perspective, from where you sit, what do you see as some of the maybe the one toughest challenge that you see in operations and supply chain? It doesn't have to be necessarily for Kenvue, but in general, right? Sitting as a CEO in the next couple of years is like, okay, this is a tough nut to crack.
Yeah, so thanks. It's a fascinating question. I think the biggest thing for me is the volatility in demand and the number of constraints that kind of pop in and up as you think about it. I mean, as you know, the holy grail for supply chain leaders is knowing how much people are going to buy, where they're going to buy it, when they're going to buy it, right? And the volatility that we've experienced, especially coming out of the pandemic, has not changed, right? What we're seeing, people use that VUCA term all the time, right? But this volatility, there used to be some cadence that, people used to be able to predict certain kinds of things. But when you think about it as a supply chain leader, you're living in an environment where the world is changing almost every day. Right. So, whether it's regulations that are changing, whether it's demand that's changing, whether it's constraints that are changing, you can ship here today, you can't ship there tomorrow. We have a volatile labor market. So to me, all those things, wrap themselves up in, we need speed. We need this ability to move with purpose in an agile fashion to react faster. And so, that's why digital is kind of right after people. Digital is my number one thing, because by having information at my fingertips, by being able to understand kind of the impact, it gives my team the best possible capability to be able to react. So for example, everybody knows there's a crisis in the Red Sea, right? And that was not something I anticipated. But because we have a digital ecosystem in our logistics and distribution center, I know where every container is all the time as it's on the water. I know what's in those containers. I know where they are. I can track them. And so by being able to see that within an hour of these attacks, of the shipping companies pivoting from going through the way they normally go to going around the horn, we were able to determine what was impacted, what we needed to do, and the team could then establish a way around that doesn't impact customers and consumers. And so for me, that ability to react with speed to constantly changing situations is the big key and the big unlock for us, because I can't tell you what crisis is going to come next. And I can tell you how I can prepare to have that agility to be able to react to the crisis. And so that's why our investment philosophy is all about, where am I placing my bets? Right? Because I can't digitize everything overnight. I can't fix every, data problem every night. I can't fix every, I can't have infinite surge capacity. The question is where am I placing those bets in order to be able to make sure that in those critical areas where I can anticipate more volatility, am I ready for it? And so that's where I would say is the most important thing for us as we think about the challenges we face.
On the topic of people, first question is perhaps there's a lot of young people listening to the podcast as well. In fairness, I had this discussion with Yossi Sheffi, who we both know, who's a professor at MIT, and this was the last book, right, with the way he talked about artificial intelligence. And I actually asked him, like, look, Professor Sheffi, I mean, in all fairness, this artificial intelligence, ultimately jobs that are between 0 to 5 years of experience, they will be automated. It's just a matter of time, right? So white collar, not blue collar so much. And he was saying, yeah, Radu, I see it as as happening. And he's so I was asking, so what should a young professional do then, right? How do you, even if you're 20, 23, I don't know, 20, no, 18 to 23, let's say 24 years old, how do you, is there a way to even prepare for what's coming? What would be your crystal ball that nobody has, Meri? Advice, right, to a young professional, to a young student? What are some of the principal skills that no matter what happens, it will still be useful?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great comment. And I would say that, throughout time, if you look back in history, every phase of this industrial revolution that we go through, whether it was, electricity or water management or anything else, there's been this fear that all jobs have gone away. And yet every industrial revolution, there are more jobs now than there were before. And so the question is not whether or not there will be jobs for people in that 0 to 5 years. Of course there will be. But the jobs are not necessarily going to be the ones that we had before, so I'm sure that the people who are at one point carrying water up the hill for factories to use in production, when replaced with a water pump, found something else to do. So the question is today, what do you need to do? So I always tell everyone, your biggest skill is your ability to learn. And you have to remember that every day I'm learning new things. And I'm always exploring what's next, and I'm always exploring what's next. And so, I read tremendous amounts and, force my teams to read them too. It's like, look, there's this idea. Sometimes it drives them a little crazy, but it's like, oh, here's this new idea that we need to think about. Yeah. Because I've seen this, this industry is now being done, my friends, in X company came along and they're doing this really cool thing. And, and then I'll go to my team and I'm like, this is it. This is the unlock. How are we going to do it too? And so it's like, how are you constantly embracing that learning and becoming that lifelong learner so that you're always prepared for the next thing? What I would say is that careers stagnate when you stop learning, when you stop looking for the next thing, when you stop embracing the change, and instead of being afraid of it, you're reaching out for it and learning and understanding. And, it's like I said before, it's like, look, I'm vulnerable. I'm never going to be good at AI. Never. I don't understand it, although I have figured out how to work ChatGPT. But I think that, and it's totally cool, but I learned it from my son-in-law, who actually told me what he's doing with it and how he's using it in his business application. And so it's like, well, I could do that and I can try it. It's like, how are you embracing the next thing in order to be able to make sure that you're always current? Because even if I'm not going to be an expert in data science, if I'm never going to code anything, I can embrace the technology and I can learn how it can best move the needle on the next transformation. But if I'm afraid of it and I'm protecting against it, then I'm a dinosaur. And we all know what happens to dinosaurs. In this history of the world, dinosaurs are not really there anymore. So it's like, how can we all be part of this next evolution through continuous learning and continuous evolving ourselves? And granted, that makes us uncomfortable, but we grow the most when we're uncomfortable. So, you asked me at one point, is like, how did I manage by going through different kinds of, supply chains, different industries? It's because I'm always my best when I'm uncomfortable and learning. And so if I'm going into a new situation and I'm digesting as much information as possible, what is it that makes this industry tick? What's the unlock for potential in this business? Then that's when I'm at my best. It's actually when I have the biggest insights. And it's when I'm just like kind of chunking along and life is good that I feel like I'm stagnant. And that's when I have to kind of go find something to disrupt everything so that we can kind of think through the next thing. And I think it's all the same on that. It doesn't matter, how old you are, where you are in your career. If you embrace this philosophy that you always need to be better through learning, you're going to always be an invaluable asset for any company.
Love it. And love the passion. Contagious, Mary. Final question. You've already shared a lot, but I do like to ask this. Any other piece of advice? So if you're here sitting and maybe there's, 5 to 10 years in their careers and they want to make it to the C-suite, they want to one day to be a CEO like yourself. Any other piece of advice that you haven't shared that you would tell our listeners?
Yeah, I think we'd all have the same advice. Take a risky job. Take the job that everyone's afraid of. Take a turnaround. Take one you're not sure you can do. Because you know what? At the end of the day, the easy jobs don't get you the promotions. They don't give you the visibility. They don't test you in a way to see what you're capable of. It's kind of like I said, in the beginning, and one of my inflection moments was that I was in a really tough turnaround. And the confidence that you gain through success is bigger when you're tackling something you didn't think you could get done. And so, throughout my career, my biggest jumps have come when I've taken those jobs that, were hard, were the ones that, everybody was like, oh, don't go do that. It's like,
You're
how
gonna die.
can you take those things that are
Yeah.
like, I'll do that because it needs to be done. And it's not a matter of, is it sexy? Is it, easy? Can I put up, great results every time? It's the turnaround. It's the pivot that you can say, when I look back to where we were and where we are now, I did that. And I did that with putting together a great team. And together we tackled insurmountable challenges and we wound up to move the needle for the business. Those are the jobs that get you the jumps. And it's not the ones that are kind of kind of look good, always be green on your scorecard kinds of things that people go, yep, that's the battle tested leader I want in the trenches. Because those are the people who they're going to look to, is the people who were successful in pulling through difficult times.
It does remind me of a fairly left field analogy. I started my career in organizational development and management consulting, and I had my first boss at that time. Mary was a gentleman, Andrew O'Brien. I'm still in touch with him. A lovely guy. He helped me, and I mean I owe most of the things that I know, a lot of them, to him early in my career. And before he became a motivational speaker, coach of CEOs, and so on, around 5 years into his journey, he actually wrote a flirting book. So it was about skills on how do you get your partner and so on. And he was telling me this story, and it is linked to what you just said, but in a different angle. He was saying that if you want to go into a discotheque and you're looking for a partner, actually to flirt with or to talk to, if you go for the 10, right, the best looking whatever you're into, right, it's actually easier than if you go for average. Because for average the competition is higher, because most people are like, yeah, I'll go for average because this is too, they're too good looking, right? I mean, it's not my, I can't even go there. And whilst it is a bit of a stretch of an analogy, but it is that the harder things are, also the competition is less in some very weird way, because a lot of people go for, yeah, I'll just go for safe. I'll play it safe.
Mhm.
And it's also a piece of kind of sharing and advice that I've heard a few leaders that made it just like yourself come here and share with us. So thank you for enforcing that. With that being said, Meri, it's been a pleasure to have you. Many
Thank you.
thanks for the many different stories and inspirational thoughts shared, and wishing you lots of success in the years to come and in the many transformations I'm sure that you will lead.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure and a lot of fun. Good way to kind of start a Friday.
Likewise.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to go to www.elcotglobal.com and click the podcast button for all the show notes of the interview. Also, subscribe to our mailing list to get our latest updates first. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes, Spotify, or Stitcher, we would appreciate a kind review. 5-star works best to keep us going and our production team happy. And of course, share it with your friends. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me. And if you have any suggestions on what to do and who to invite next, don't hesitate to drop me a note. And if you're looking to hire top executives in supply chain or transform your business, of course, contact us as well to find out how we can help.